I had built my entire life around one single rule. Never change. Never soften. Never admit that the version of myself I had constructed was anything less than complete. Change meant failure. Change meant weakness. I was wrong. I stood alone in my rooftop observatory above Dubai, watching something impossible unfold on the screen in front of me. Something that should not exist. Something that would tear through 12 years of carefully maintained distance like they were nothing. I whispered it out loud, my voice cracking in the silence. I never expected to change, and 3i Atlas triggered my awakening. Saying it felt like confessing to a crime I thought I had gotten away with. The desert wind pressed softly against the glass walls of my rooftop observatory. Below, the city glowed in gold and white, every skyscraper another monument to control. Up here, I hid in silence with my telescopes and screens, watching the sky instead of my own life. It felt safer to track distant objects than to look honestly at myself. The air conditioning hummed low, the temperature set to exactly 70 degrees. Everything in its place. I stood in front of the main holographic display and adjusted the controls with practiced precision. The image of 3i Atlas sharpened in the dark. An elongated shape with fractured teal light breathing along its surface. Astronomers called it an interstellar object. Investors called it a risk. To me, it was a distraction that moved on schedule, unlike people. I zoomed in slowly, watching the blue fractures pulse once, then again, like something alive but unreachable. A narrow rectangular pool of water framed the center of the observatory floor, a design choice from an architect who believed in calm. I never stepped close to it. The idea of feeling cold water seep into my skin made me uneasy in a way I refused to examine. It reminded me of something I could not name. Something soft and vulnerable I had decided long ago I would never be again. I stayed dry, always. I returned my attention to 3i Atlas and increased the magnification. The numbers scrolled along the side of the interface, tracking velocity and angle. I had seen this screen 1,000 times in the last year. It had never done what it did next. The live feed flickered. For a moment the data strip went blank, replaced by 4 empty underscores glowing on the lower corner of the glass. My hand moved toward the controls, but before I could touch anything, a single letter faded in where the first line had been. N's white, sharp, impossibly clear. I frowned and checked the input sources. No alerts, no messages, no external systems connected. The S grew brighter. Then, a second letter appeared beside it. To my stomach tightened, a slow pulling sensation beneath my ribs. The third came slower, as if something was deciding whether to continue. Letter A, my breath caught in my throat. I already knew what the last letter would be before it arrived. Why stay? The word glowed in front of 3i Atlas, hovering over the dark like an accusation I could not delete. My throat closed. For a second I was not in Dubai anymore. I was 23, standing in that small living room in Denver with scuffed wooden floors and faded curtains. My sister's voice cracked, "Stay, please just stay." Her hands were shaking. I saw the tears running down her cheeks. The way her breath hitched when she realized I was really leaving. I picked up my suitcase anyway. The sound of the door closing behind me never left. My chest broke open. The ache spread deep beneath my ribs, hot and sharp, as if something inside me that had been frozen for years suddenly thawed and hurt. I had spent more than a decade burying that night under deals, flights, and numbers. I thought I had outrun it. I thought distance and success were armor enough. Seeing that word here, now, in my private observatory above a city where no one knew my past, felt like the universe had reached into the one place. I could still pretend I was untouched and pressed a finger directly into the oldest bruise I had. I tried to shake it off, to treat it like a glitch, change the filter, reset the feed. Reboot the main console. Every command executed perfectly, but the word stayed. It even adjusted its position as I shifted the angle of the telescope, as if it were pinned not to my equipment, but to the comet itself. I whispered to the empty room that this was impossible. My voice did not sound like mine. Part of me wanted to shut everything down and walk away. But another part, one I hadn't heard from in years, whispered that maybe I wasn't supposed to. I forced myself back into analysis. If the signal was real, it had to be encoded in something measurable. The letters, their timing, the intervals between pulses of light around 3i Atlas. I started writing numbers on a digital pad, turning seconds into units, matching each flash to the appearance of S. T-A-Y-A pattern emerged, steady and deliberate. This was not random noise. This was a message, and for reasons I did not want to admit, it was meant for me. My hands moved faster, calculating, cross-referencing, trying to prove myself wrong. I converted the intervals into coordinates out of habit. It was the kind of obsessive puzzle my mind understood, the kind of task that let me avoid feeling anything real. Degrees, minutes, seconds, cross-referenced with global maps. The first run gave me nothing but ocean. I refined the input, adjusted for the comet's trajectory, reversed the order of the sequence. When the new location rendered on the map, I stepped back as if someone had pushed me. My heart pounded hard against my chest. It was not an exact address yet, only a cluster of streets on the edge of Denver, but I knew that area better than anywhere on Earth. The coordinates were reaching for the neighborhood where I grew up, pointing toward the hill that overlooked our old house. I stared at the word stay glowing beside 3i Atlas and felt the ground inside me shift. Whatever this was, it wanted me to go back. And for the first time in years, I was not sure I had the strength to refuse. I booked the flight to Denver before I could talk myself out of it. My hands moved across my phone screen with the same precision I used to close billion-dollar deals, but inside I felt something crack and shift. Like ice breaking under weight it was never supposed to hold. The coordinates glowed on my tablet. The word stay pulsed softly beside them. I told myself I was going to disprove this, to find the rational explanation. I knew I was lying. The Mercedes-Maybach S680 pulled up to my tower exactly 12 minutes later. The driver opened the door without a word. I slid into the back seat and the world outside went silent. Cream leather surrounded me, soft ambient light glowed from hidden strips along the ceiling, and the glass between me and Dubai felt thick enough to block out every sound, every question, every uncomfortable feeling. This car had always been my favorite kind of isolation, luxurious, controlled, safe. I placed my tablet on my lap and opened the observatory feed. The signal was still there. Stay. I zoomed out and checked the comet's position in the sky. 3i Atlas hung low on the horizon, visible through the tinted window as the car merged onto the highway toward the airport. Its teal fractures pulsed in rhythm with something I felt in my chest but refused to name. I forced my attention back to the numbers. My Patek Philippe caught the soft light as I raised my wrist to check the time. 3:47 a.m. I'd worn this watch every day since my first 8-figure bonus. A reminder that I had made it, that I had escaped the life I came from. The second hand moved smoothly around the face. Then it stuttered. Paused. Moved again. My stomach tightened. I tapped the crystal. The second hand froze completely at the 12. I stared at the stopped watch on my wrist and felt something cold move through me. Time had been the one thing I could control. Schedules, deadlines, intervals between calls I didn't want to make. Now even that was breaking down. I tried to restart it, pressing the crown, winding it manually. Nothing. The hand stayed frozen. The car accelerated smoothly onto the empty desert highway, and I realized I had no idea what time it really was anymore. The tablet screen flickered. I looked down expecting a system update. Instead, the word stay multiplied. It appeared once in the corner, then again across the center, then in a slow cascade down the entire display, until every inch of glass showed the same 4 letters repeating like a heartbeat I could not silence. My breath came short and fast. I closed the feed. The words disappeared. I opened it again. They returned instantly, brighter than before. I tried to focus on the decryption. The intervals between pulses, the coordinates, the trajectory data. But my mind kept pulling back to the last time someone had asked me to stay. The last time I had been in a position to choose connection over control. My hands went cold even though the car's climate system was set to 72 degrees. I knew what memory was coming. I had spent 12 years making sure it stayed buried. I was 23. I stood in the living room of our childhood home in Denver, my suitcase already packed and waiting by the door. My sister stood in front of me with her arms crossed, her face pale and exhausted. She had been taking care of our mother alone for 6 months while I built my first startup in California. "You said you'd come back," she said quietly. Her voice was steady, but I saw her hands shaking. "You said this was temporary." I looked at the floor. I told her the company needed me. I told her this was the moment that would define my career. She took a step closer, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. "Mom is dying," she said. "She's asking for you every day. And you keep choosing meetings over her. Over us." I felt my chest go tight, but I forced my voice to stay calm. I told her I would visit more. I told her I'd send money for better care. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she said the words I never forgot. "You didn't leave to build something, Daniel. You left because you're terrified of feeling anything real. You'd rather be successful and alone than stay here and risk being ordinary and loved." Her voice cracked on the last word. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "Stay, please just stay." I picked up my suitcase. I walked out. I didn't go back until after the funeral. The memory hit me so hard I doubled over in the back seat of the Maybach. My chest felt crushed. Like someone had reached inside and squeezed every regret I'd ever swallowed into a single burning point. Tears came without warning and ran hot down my face. I pressed my palms against my eyes, but the shame kept rising. She had been right. I had chosen control over connection. I had chosen empire over presence. And I had told myself for over a decade that I'd made the smart decision, the strong decision. But sitting here in a car worth more than my mother's entire house, I felt like the poorest man alive. I forced myself to breathe. I opened my eyes and looked at my tablet. The word stay had stopped multiplying. Now it pulsed once, slowly, like a question waiting for an answer. I checked the coordinates again. They had refined themselves. No longer a cluster of streets, now a single address. 1247 Maple Ridge Lane, our old house. The place I swore I would never go back to. The place where my sister still lived alone because I had been too proud and too afraid to ever call. The Maybach pulled smoothly into the private airport entrance. The driver opened my door. I stepped out into the warm desert air and looked up. 3i Atlas hung directly overhead now, brighter than I'd ever seen it, its teal light steady and patient. The word stay glowed on my tablet one last time before the screen went dark. I didn't need the coordinates anymore. I knew exactly where I had to go. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sure I deserved to be welcome there. I stood on the cracked sidewalk in front of 1247 Maple Ridge Lane and felt 12 years collapse into a single breath. The house looked smaller than I remembered. The white paint faded to gray. The lawn overgrown with weeds pushing through the fence. I had flown through the night, landed in Denver at dawn, and taken a rental car straight here without calling ahead, without planning what I would say. Now I was here, and my legs refused to move toward the door. The morning air was cold and thin. I pulled my suit jacket tighter, but the chill came from somewhere deeper than weather. The house was dark inside. No car in the driveway. My sister wasn't home, or maybe she had moved and I was standing in front of a ghost. I walked slowly up the 3 concrete steps and tried the door. Unlocked. I pushed it open and the smell of old wood and dust hit me like a memory I couldn't escape. I stepped inside. The living room was almost empty. The furniture I remembered, our mother's floral couch, the wooden coffee table my father built, was gone, replaced by a single chair near the window and a small bookshelf against the wall. The hardwood floors creaked under my shoes. I stood in the center of the room and turned slowly, taking in the faded wallpaper, the water stain on the ceiling, the window that looked out onto the quiet street. This was where I had said goodbye. This was where I had chosen to leave. I walked to the window and placed my hand on the glass. It was cold. I looked out at the gray Denver sky and saw 3i Atlas hanging low on the horizon, its teal fractures glowing softly even in daylight. For a moment I thought about turning around, getting back in the car, flying back to Dubai where I could pretend none of this had happened. But my chest tightened and I knew running was no longer an option. Something inside me had shifted, and I couldn't force it back into place. I felt a strange pulse move through my body. Not pain, but pressure, like a wave starting deep in my ribs and spreading outward. I pressed my hand against my chest. My heart was beating faster than normal, hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I looked back at the comet through the window. It pulsed once, a slow ripple of blue light along its surface. My heart pulsed at the exact same moment. I held my breath. The comet pulsed again. My heart answered. The synchronization was impossible, but I felt it with absolute certainty. 3-1 Atlas was no longer something I observed from a distance. It was inside me now, matching my rhythm, listening to my fear. I closed my eyes and tried to steady my breathing, but the pulsing continued, steady and patient. As if the comet was waiting for me to stop resisting and finally pay attention to what I had been avoiding my entire life. My heart raced faster. The air in the room grew heavier, pressing down on my shoulders like invisible hands. A wave of heat rose through my chest, spreading up into my neck and face. My vision blurred at the edges. I opened my eyes and tried to focus on the window, but the glass seemed to ripple and shift. A soft teal haze filled the air, wrapping around me until I couldn't see the street anymore. My knees went weak. I reached for the wall to steady myself, but my hand passed through empty space. Then the vision arrived. I saw myself standing in this same room, but I was older. My hair was gray. My face was lined and thin. I wore an expensive suit that hung loose on my shoulders. I stood alone in the center of the empty living room, holding my phone in one shaking hand. I scrolled through my contacts slowly, desperately, looking for someone to call. But every name I passed was a stranger, a business associate, someone I had paid to care. I kept scrolling. No family. No friends. No one who would answer if I said I needed help. The phone slipped from my hand and clattered on the wooden floor. I bent to pick it up, but my knees buckled and I sank down alone. No one came. No one even knew I was there. The vision ended abruptly and I gasped for air. I was back in the present, standing at the window with my heart pounding so hard I thought it would crack my ribs. Tears streamed down my face, my hands were shaking. The fear that moved through me was not abstract or distant, it was visceral, immediate, a terror so deep I felt it in my bones. I had spent my entire life building walls to protect myself from vulnerability, from rejection, from the messy, unbearable weight of needing other people. And in that single vision I saw the endgame of every choice I had made. I would die alone. Successful, powerful, completely and utterly alone. I turned away from the window and pressed my back against the wall, sliding down until I sat on the cold wooden floor. I pulled my knees up and buried my face in my hands. My whole body shook. I wanted to scream, to punch something, to run until I couldn't feel anything anymore, but I couldn't move. The weight of the vision held me down like gravity. I couldn't escape. I had been so certain that control was strength, that independence was freedom, that not needing anyone meant I could never be hurt. I was wrong. I had been wrong for 12 years. I looked up at the ceiling and whispered to the empty room that I didn't know how to change. The words came out broken and small, nothing like the voice I used in boardrooms and negotiations. I had built an empire on the belief that I didn't need to change. That the man I was at 23 was good enough to carry me through the rest of my life. But sitting here on the floor of my childhood home, I finally understood the truth. I wasn't strong, I was terrified. And if I didn't find a way to let people in, to feel what I had been running from, I would spend the next 40 years becoming the hollow version of myself I had just seen in that vision. I forced myself to stand. My legs felt weak, but I walked back to the window and looked out at 3i Atlas one more time. The comet pulsed once, gently, like a hand on my shoulder. The fear was still there, heavy and real, but underneath it I felt something else beginning to break through. Not hope, not yet, but a quiet knowing that I couldn't stay here any longer. I had one more place to go. One more step to take. And this time I wasn't running away. I was walking toward the only thing that could save me. I drove to Cherry Creek Reservoir without thinking, my hands moving on the wheel like they remembered a path my mind had buried. I had come here as a child with my mother and sister on summer mornings before the heat set in. I parked the rental car on the gravel lot and stepped out into the cold dawn air. The sky was pale gray turning gold at the edges. I was alone. I walked slowly down the dirt path toward the shore. My dress shoes pressed into the soft earth. When I reached the water's edge, I stopped and looked out at the lake. The surface was perfectly still, reflecting the sky and the dark line of trees. 3i Atlas hung low on the horizon, its teal fractures glowing softly. I watched it pulse once, gently, like a final acknowledgement. Then it went completely still. I took off my jacket and draped it over a nearby rock. I rolled up my sleeves slowly, exposing my forearms to the morning cold. I looked down at my paycheck Felipe. The hands were still frozen at 3:47. I unclasped it from my wrist, held it in my palm for a moment, then let it slip from my fingers into the shallow water. It sank without a sound. I untied my dress shoes and pulled them off. I peeled off my socks and placed them inside the shoes. Then I walked forward until my bare feet touched the cold water at the lake's edge. The sensation shot through me like electricity, sharp and immediate and completely real. I had spent so long avoiding this exact feeling. But standing here now with my feet in the water and my chest open to the morning air, I felt something I had not felt in years. Relief. The air around me shifted. A soft warmth rose through my chest even though the morning was cold. The mist on the lake thickened, rising higher until it wrapped around me. My vision blurred at the edges. Tears welled up without warning, not from pain but from something softer. A golden fog spread across the water until I couldn't see the opposite shore anymore. My heart slowed to a steady, calm rhythm. Then the vision arrived. I saw the lake, but it was later in the day. The sun was higher, warm and golden. I stood at the water's edge in jeans and a plain shirt, my feet still bare. My sister walked toward me from the parking lot. She was older, her hair longer, but her eyes were softer than I remembered. She stopped a few feet away and looked at me. I saw hesitation in her face, but also something else. Hope. I took a step toward her. She didn't move away. We stood there for a moment without speaking. Then she smiled just a little and said my name. Not angry, not accusing, just my name. I told her I was sorry. The words came out quiet but clear. And I meant them more than I had ever meant anything. She nodded slowly, her eyes filling with tears. Then she reached out and took my hand. Her fingers were warm. We turned and started walking along the shore together. We talked as we walked. Not about the past, not yet, but about small things. The way the light looked on the water. The sound of birds waking up. She told me about her life, the quiet rhythm of her days, the garden she had planted. I listened without interrupting, without trying to fix anything, without offering money or solutions. I just listened. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. The vision stretched forward. I saw us sitting on a bench overlooking the lake, sharing coffee from a thermos she had brought. I saw her laughing at something I said, a real laugh. I saw myself reaching over and squeezing her shoulder gently, a gesture I had never allowed myself before. I saw the two of us walking back to the parking lot as the sun climbed higher. I saw a future where I didn't have to be perfect or unbreakable to be loved. I just had to be present. The vision faded slowly, gently. I opened my eyes and I was back at the shore alone, my feet still in the cold water, the mist clearing around me. But the warmth in my chest stayed. The fear that had lived inside me for 12 years was still there, but it was quieter now, softer. I looked up at 3IATLAS. The comet was completely still, its light steady and calm. I understood. The message had been delivered. The rest was up to me. I knew exactly what I had to do when I left this lake. I would drive back to the house on Maple Ridge Lane. I would wait on the front steps until my sister came home. I would not rehearse what to say. I would just sit there, present and vulnerable, and when she arrived I would tell her the truth. That I had been wrong. That I had been afraid. That I wanted to try again, even if she wasn't ready to forgive me yet. I would show up every day after that if she let me. I would learn how to be a brother instead of a billionaire. I would change the way I lived. Not just with her, but with everyone. I would stop using money and distance as armor. I would let people see me when I was uncertain, when I needed help. I would say yes to invitations instead of finding reasons to decline. I would sit in uncomfortable conversations. I would let myself feel anger, sadness, joy, fear, all the things I had buried. I would stop treating connection like weakness and start treating it like the only thing that mattered. I took a slow breath and let it out. The sun was rising higher now, painting the lake in gold and amber. A soft breeze moved across the water, touching my face with a gentleness I had forgotten existed. I felt the cold stones under my feet, the wet hem of my pants, the warmth spreading through my chest. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind in the trees, the distant call of a bird, the quiet lapping of water. I was here. Fully, completely here. And for the first time in 12 years, that was enough. I wasn't unbreakable. I was just afraid to feel. But now, I was ready to live. If you could go back to one relationship you walked away from, one person you hurt because staying felt too vulnerable, who would you call tomorrow morning? Leave it in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story made you realize that being unbreakable isn't strength, it's just fear, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next truth is already waiting to break you open.